actually.
Now, I don't want you to worry about him. Mr. Sitwell can be a little difficult, I know, but you mustn't let him upset you. It might take some time, but you'll get used to him.
I'm sure you're right.
And if you have any concerns, any worries, you come to me, Kevin.
Thank you, Mrs. Middleton.
Sitwell likes to think he is the boss round here, but he's not. Mr. Middleton and I own this hotel, and Sitwell is a member of staff, just like you. You remember that, Kevin?
Oh, I will, Mrs. Middleton, I will.
But, Kevin, there is something I'd like to talk to you about.
Yes?
So, what can they see from Kevin's window? Kevin says,
"We're so high up, you can see for miles."
and Mrs. Middleton adds,
All the way to London on a clear day.
Kevin then looks down and says,
And look at the gardens down there. They're lovely.
yes, it seems that Middleton Hall is a lovely place. But Kevin is obviously worried about Mr. Sitwell. So what does Mrs. Middleton tell him he should do? She says,
If you have any concerns, any worries, you come to me.
She goes on,
Sitwell likes to think he's the boss round here, but he's not. Mr. Middleton and I own this hotel, and Sitwell is a member of staff, just like you.
You're listening to Middleton Hall, a Learn English radio programme from the British Council. When the scene continues, Mrs. Middleton says,
Kevin, there is something I'd like to talk to you about.
she has noticed that Kevin is wearing training shoes, and she tells him,
They're not quite right for Middleton Hall.
Kevin replies that Mr. Sitwell said exactly the same thing, and he adds,
I promised to buy some proper shoes when I get my first paycheck.
a paycheck means the money you get for doing a job. And Kevin says that he won't get his first paycheck until the end of the month. Now, here are two questions for you as you listen. What does Mrs. Middleton offer to do for Kevin? And what does Kevin promise to do in return? Let's find out.
But, Kevin, there is something I'd like to talk to you about.
Yes?
I hope you don't mind me saying this, but do you have any other shoes?
Ah, are you talking about my trainers?
Well, yes, they're not quite right for Middleton Hall.
That's what Mr. Sitwell said. He said staff should wear highly polished black leather shoes at all times.
And I'm afraid he's right.
Yes, Mrs. Middleton, I understand. It's just that, well, I promised to buy you some proper shoes when I get my first paycheck. But that won't be until the end of the month, so I'll just have to wait until then.
I tell you what, Kevin, why don't I lend you the money to buy some new shoes?
Really? Would you do that for me?
Of course. But please, please don't tell anyone about this, especially not my husband.
Of course, I promise.
Mr. Middleton says I'm always too kind to people. He wouldn't like it if he found out. Now, yes, here we are. Now, that should be enough.
Oh, thank you, Mrs. Middleton, thank you. I'll pay you back.
You make sure you go out and buy those shoes as soon as you can.
Oh, I will. I'll do it tomorrow. Don't worry.
Good. Now, let me show you round the rest of the hotel.
Well, what does Mrs. Middleton offer to do for Kevin? She says,
Why don't I lend you the money to buy some new shoes?
but she doesn't want her husband to know about this. She explains,
Mr. Middleton says I'm always too kind to people. He wouldn't like it if he found out.
and so what does Kevin promise?
He promises not to tell anyone about it.
And that promise is going to be rather important for Kevin, as we'll find out later in the story.
You're listening to Middleton Hall, a Learn English radio series from the British Council. And don't forget, you can find more resources at the British Council Learn English website at learnenglish.britishcouncil.org.
In the next scene, Mrs. Middleton is showing Kevin around the hotel. She says to him,
And if you come through here, Kevin, this is the lounge.
a lounge is a big room in a hotel where guests can sit and have drinks, talk or watch TV. In the lounge, they meet Maria, who also works at the hotel. Mrs. Middleton says,
Maria, as usual, is trying to hide a book behind her back.
and my next question is, why is Maria carrying a book? She then talks about this evening. And here are 2 more questions for you. What does Maria want to do this evening? And what has Sitwell asked her to do? Let's find out. Here's the scene.
And if you come through here, Kevin, this is the lounge. Oh, and here's Maria.
Oh, hello, Mrs. Middleton.
And this, Maria, is Kevin.
Hello. Nice to meet you, Kevin.
And you?
Maria, as usual, is trying to hide a book behind her back.
I'm sorry, Mrs. Middleton. It's true, I am.
That's all right. You know I don't mind. Maria is a student, you see, Kevin.
Are you? What are you studying?
Mechanical engineering.
Isn't that marvellous?
Mechanical engineering. At university?
Yes, I'm doing a course up in London. It's mostly online, though, which means I can work here. I go up there for a class 1 evening a week. Or at least I do when Mr. Sitwell lets me.
What do you mean, Maria?
Oh, he's told me I have to work this evening, which is when my class is, of course.
Well, that's not right. Shall I speak to him?
No, thank you, Mrs. Middleton. But it's probably better if you don't. You see, he found me in the kitchen earlier reading when I should have been cleaning the rooms. He wasn't pleased.
I see.
I don't want to make him even more angry. Anyway, if you'll excuse me, I'd better get back to work.
So, why is Maria carrying a book?
Because she's a student.
Yes, she doesn't just work at Middleton Hall, she's also studying mechanical engineering at university in London. And what does she want to do this evening?
She wants to go to her class in London.
But what has Sitwell asked her to do?
He's told her she has to work this evening.
And Maria is not happy about it. When the scene continues, we hear Kevin say,
Oh, Maria, don't forget your bag.
Maria tells him that the bag doesn't belong to her. And so Mrs. Middleton says,
One of the guests must have left it.
and here are 2 questions for you to answer as you listen. Which guest does Mrs. Middleton think has left her bag? And what does Mrs. Middleton say she is going to do with it? Here's the final part of the scene.
Anyway, if you'll let me, I'd better get back to work.
Yes, of course.
Maria,
Yes?
don't forget your bag.
My bag? I haven't got a bag.
What about this?
Oh, that's not mine.
Well, whose is it then?
Let me see. Oh, one of the guests must have left it. Yes, and I can probably guess which one.
Mrs. Sheridan, perhaps?
Yes, Mrs. Sheridan. She forgets everything. Could you take this to reception, Kevin, and give it to Sitwell?
Yes, of course.
Maria,
Yes?
I'm going away for a couple of nights, and I was wondering, could you make sure Kevin is all right while I'm gone?
Of course, Mrs. Middleton.
I just don't want anything to go wrong. We know what Sitwell is like, and we all remember what happened to the last one.
Yes, and the one before him, too. Don't worry, I'll look after him.
Thank you, Maria.
Mrs. Middleton, I'm sorry, but Mr. Sitwell's not there.
Isn't he? Oh, well, never mind. Give it to me. I'll put it in the hotel safe.
Excuse me, Mrs. Middleton, but I have to go.
Yes, of course, Maria, of course.
Nice to meet you, Maria.
Yes, and you.
Right. Well, Kevin, let's go through to the dining room. Come on, this way.
So, according to Mrs. Middleton, Which guest has left her bag in the lounge?
Mrs. Sheridan.
And why does she think this?
Because Mrs. Sheridan forgets everything.
And what is Mrs. Middleton going to do with the bag? She says,
I'll put it in the hotel safe.
a safe is a strong box with a lock where people keep valuable things like money and jewellery. And we'll find out more about Mrs. Sheridan's handbag in the next programme. Now here's a chance to hear a part of today's drama again.
So this is your room, Kevin.
Oh, it is nice.
It's not very big, but it's got everything you need. Bed, wardrobe, desk. I'm sure you'll be comfortable.
Thank you, Mrs. Middleton. I'm sure I will. Oh, and look at the view. We're so high up. You can see for miles.
All the way to London on a clear day, way out there in the distance.
Oh, and look at the gardens down there. They're lovely.
Yes, Middleton Hall is a lovely place. And I hope you'll be happy here, Kevin.
I'm sure I will be. Although, well, there is something I want to ask you.
I think I know what you're going to say, Kevin. Is it about Mr. Sitwell?
Well, yes, it is actually.
Now, I don't want you to worry about him. Mr. Sitwell can be a little difficult, I know, but you mustn't let him upset you. It might take some time, but you'll get used to him.
But that's all for today. You've been listening to Middleton Hall, a British Council Learn English radio series. And remember, you can find more resources at the British Council Learn English website at learnenglish.britishcouncil.org. Until next time, from Amanda Carlton and me, David Evans.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.